All right, 6:05. I'm just going to jump into it. So, welcome everybody who's able to make it live. If you're not, then you'll be able to see this on the recording afterwards. Basically, what we're going to do tonight is going to jump into some sort of computer hacking at a basic level. I'm going to assume that you have zero knowledge of security or hacking or anything like that. The only thing I would expect is a little bit of knowledge around IP addresses, maybe some ports, something like that. Experienced hackers, or if you've been in the world for a few years, you won't really get anything out of tonight. But in the future, I hope to have something a little more advanced. I'm just kind of using this stream as a gauge to see how well everything's received. I accept feedback as much as you want. You can hit me up privately or send me a message. I'd like to keep that to after the chat, but if there's something that I'm doing, in real time that you guys don't like, let me know. I'm going to try to keep the trolling to a minimum. That's why we've got two mods here. Normally I don't mind trolls during my gaming streams, but being this one's kind of for learning, I want to keep it a little bit more easy. All right, so without further ado, let's jump into it. So the goal tonight, I have this server up here, which is a server you can download from vulnhub.com. It's called MrRobot. It's based off the TV show. And the goal is to hack this from having no access whatsoever to root and administrator access. Before I start diving into the technical, we're just going to touch on a few key points and then some basic tools. First thing will be ports. Now, hopefully everybody here has a basic understanding of ports, but if not, computers all have ports. Computers, firewalls, what have you. If it talks on the internet, it's got a port. And these ports are delineated by numbers between 0 and 65,535. I didn't remember that. I've got a little reference sheet over here. Anytime you use the internet, you're using a port to talk. You're talking from and talking to. Some common ones are like port 80 is HTTP, port 443 is HTTPS, 22 is SSH, 25 is your mail servers. Those are all just really common ones that you're interacting with and you don't even know it. Or you do know it if you've been in the security world or networking world. So using ports is our best way to scan and kind of get into a computer in the first place, right? The ports will have services on the back end like SSH, like SMTP, like HTTP, and depending on the version of those ports, some of them are exploitable. I don't want to say all of them are exploitable, but I like to think all of them are exploitable. We just haven't found out how yet. Cool. So we'll go into some of the tools here. The first tool in pretty much any sort of technical scanning world is Nmap. So what Nmap does, it's short for network mapper. And if anybody has any questions while I'm in the middle of this, please feel free to mention them in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them as I go. What Nmap does is it's extremely powerful. Let me just preface that by every one of the tools I'm going to talk about is extremely powerful and can do significantly more than whatever I'm about to show you, but high level, right? So Nmap is a network mapping tool that checks IP addresses and hosts for any open ports. It can check and see which ports are open, tell you what services are running on it. So it might be 25 might be open, and that's your SMTP or your mail server. But what version of mail server? What program is running on the mail server? Because different programs have different exploits. So that's what Nmap is going to be used for. We're going to use that to scan our MrRobot machine and find out what ports are open and how we can make use of those ports. The next item is a word list. So a word list, let me show you here. A word list is literally just a list of words, right? It's a very large list of words. So for example, rocku.txt is a very common one used. These are just the first few lines of it. And if I do a command here, it's WC for word count, -L for lines, it's going to tell me how many lines are in this file. There's 14,344,392 words in this list. So a word list can be used for several things, but the main premise behind it is a brute force. In this case, Rocky is used for a password attack. It's essentially if I'm trying to attack the admin password, I'll take this list and use a different tool and say, for every single line in this list, I want you to try logging into the admin account with this line as the password. So it'll try admin and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then 1 through 9, and so on down the list for all 14 million of these lines. If it succeeds, then it'll let you in. Brute force isn't seen as often today because you've got things like two-step authentication, or like if you try logging in to your bank account 3 times incorrectly, it locks you out. But it's still out there in the wild, and it's definitely something that people need to be more considerate of. The other thing word lists can be used for is searching websites for files or directories. And that's going to bring us to DIRB. So DIRB stands for Directory Buster, or rather a command line version of a tool called Directory Buster. But what this will do is you give it a URL and then the word list file, which would be RockU, and we'll go into this actually. You'll see all these tools in action when it happens. And all this does is it goes to, let's just say the website is Google, right? I'm not actually going to run this because I don't want Google to, see that I'm running it. Because brute force is very loud. I'm going to be making 14 million requests in like a few minutes, so not great. So if I ran something like that, it would go to google.com and try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as the first website. Google.com/12345, Google.com/1235678, Google.com/password. If it finds any of those and it works and it lets it in, then it'll return that to you and say, hey, we found this. You try browsing there and see what's available. That is still totally feasible to do today on production systems. Depending on your security, the security of the website that you're attacking, you might fire off some alerts, and then the security team will say, oh, who's this guy from Florida running 14 million requests against our website in a few minutes. So it's noticeable, but there's not necessarily stuff that can stop you. So that's really important. And that's just another use of a word list. The other one I wanted to show was a robots.txt file. I don't have an example of that because I don't have a website that I really want to browse to view the robots.txt. But if you go to actually Facebook is a good example. Go to facebook.com/robots.txt, right? The robots.txt file is a list of websites and pages on Facebook's domain that they don't want random Joe Schmo Googling and coming across. For example, and I'm not saying that they have this, but let's say Facebook had a website for all of their passwords, right? And it was called facebookpasswords.html. They would put Facebook passwords.html as a name inside of their robots.txt file. So when Google's searching through Facebook for things and it's querying the website, it'll see it's in the robot.txt and it won't present that to a user. That's like the 10,000 foot level kind of explanation for that. It's important because that's really good for a really good resource to check out during a pen test, because you can see if there is something that might be juicy that they just don't want you to find out. I mean, for me, when I'm attacking something, I want to find the things they don't want me to find. That's the whole point. So we're going to keep that one in mind as well. Okay, so next we've got the reverse shell. This one I can kind of show you a little bit. So any sort of command line like terminal, which is what we're using here, or command line on Windows, right? These are all referred to as shells. It's just another phrase for it. Any questions, by the way, so far? Anything that I jumped too fast for? I know I have a tendency of talking pretty quick. Haven't lost anybody yet, so that's pretty cool. All right, seems to be good. So these are all shells. Your goal as a hacker is to get a shell on the server or on another computer. You want to be able to run arbitrary commands like you could do. Awesome, it's cool, Candair. That's all right. I appreciate you tuning in. So what we want to do is try to get a shell on that server. Now, I can't just, log into the server unless I know the username and password, but chances are I won't. So a reverse shell is a way of getting a shell or a terminal or command prompt on the remote system in a really unconventional way. It'll make a lot more sense when you see it happening, but that's the base understanding of it. The next tool which you use to actually catch reverse shells is Netcat. Now, Netcat, I can't stress to you how powerful this tool actually is, but what you do with Netcat is interact with ports. Okay. For example, when you send an email in Outlook, in the back end, it's connecting to port 25 or port 993 or whatever it is your server settings are, and it's sending commands like hello, login, password, and it's sending all these values across automatically. Netcat allows you to connect directly to those ports and send any of the commands that you want to send. What we can do here is I will show you, I will start a Netcat listener to listen for ports on port 3000. Okay. And on this one, I will connect to port 3000. Now, 127.0.01, for those of you that don't know, is your local host. It is your computer's own IP address. It basically says talk to yourself. So when I connect here, you can see that it found a connection. Right? I am connected to myself from here. And now, as I run a command or two, it pops up on the other side. That's really important because here it's plain text, but when you have a support system on the other end, you could run arbitrary commands, and this terminal here, I'm pointing to my screen like you can see where I'm pointing, this terminal here will run those commands as a regular user would. But that's what Netcat's used for, is to talk to ports and listen for conversations between ports. That is a brief 10 seconds or less. Almost done with the tools before we dive into the nitty-gritty, but the next one is WordPress. So WordPress isn't a hacking tool. WordPress is an application that runs on servers. Linux and Windows can host WordPress sites, and it's just a easy way for people to host websites or blogs. It's very templatey. It's very powerful. I know people that are really good with WordPress and can make amazing websites out of it. But in order to do that, they have plugins or themes, something of that nature. And that's how you make yours look different. The vulnerability isn't always in WordPress, the application itself, but these themes are custom made, which means if you were to write a WordPress theme, you might not program it properly, and that'll allow me full access to be able to break down your code and break into your server because you didn't code it properly, or whoever you paid to didn't program it properly. It's probably the most popular software for hosting blogs. I use it for mine. I try to keep it secure, but that's a very common one. And during my courses, WordPress was definitely out there, and even during some live penetration tests I've done, there have been WordPress sites available, and I've used the exploit we're going to show tonight is the most common one that I've used, and I've used it several times. So it's really cool. All right, hashing. So a hash this is actually really cool. A hash, when you hash something, you're taking a string, like say Nico, and instead of it being just Nico, if you run, which is why WordPress shouldn't be allowed in enterprise applications. Yeah, it has its uses, and there's WordPress Professional or WordPress Enterprise or something that does allow more security than WordPress Basic. I don't have a lot of experience with that though. So with hashing. So hashing is a mathematical algorithm that takes a string of numbers, letters, entire files, pictures, whatever it is, taking all that data and converting it to a fixed string of numbers and letters. I'll show you an example here. So this is something that MD5 is a type of hashing, okay? And it's really old, but there's a fixed algorithm that if I type in my name and I hit crypt, well, I have a storefront now. Once I get through the CAPTCHA, this is the hash output of Nicholas. That will always be the MD5 hash output of Nicholas. But if we look here, we'll paste that in. If I put my name as a capital N instead, and I crypt it, I like to think the CAPTCHAs are wrong. It's not me. The hash changes. So even though it's the same name, it's case sensitive, it matters, it changes the entire string. It's very uncommon to find two unique hashes, which is what makes hashing very powerful. The thing with hashing is there is no way back, right? So I can't take this string and run an algorithm behind it and go back to Nicholas. You can't do it. That's the point of a good hash. Bad hashing, I guess you can if you had the source code. But even then, you wouldn't really be able to do it. So this is why it's smart for companies to store passwords in hash format. So if I break into the server and I see a big list of passwords, if I open it up, all I'm going to see is this garbage. It's not going to mean anything to me. I can't do anything with it. But MD5 is old. So MD5 has been around for a long time, and the way you can decrypt a hash, and I'm putting that in quotes because it's not actually decrypting it, is you take one of those word lists that we talked about, and you hash every iteration of the words in there and say, okay, I'm going to hash the word Nicholas. Does that hash match the hash that I have? Oh, it does? Perfect. Then the password is Nicholas. So using common words is a really bad idea because it likely exists. If you look down here, there is, well, what number is that? Is that a trillion? Got 1,000, million, billion, yeah. 1.15 trillion different words in their password list. So if I were to come over to here, which is their decryption, let's just, I'm sure they have this in there, although my name's not super common. God damn it. There we go. It's taking their entire list of 1 trillion passwords. It's taking the list of entire 1 trillion passwords and hashing them one at a time until it finds the hash that matches mine. So that's the only way to decrypt the hash. It's not actually decrypting, it's just encrypting and matching it up. A lot of these will use rainbow tables. What that is essentially, think of like an Excel document with two columns. Column on the left, you have all of the hashes, and on column B, you have all of the plain text words that those hashes correspond to. And then these things are essentially just a big Control F, paste in the hash, and pull out column B. That's how the hashing works. And the very last thing is a set UID file. So set UID files are files that will open or run as whatever user you give it. And let me turn the light on here. It'll run as any user it's set to. In most cases, when you run a program, it's going to run as you, as your own user. In the set UID scenario, it runs as whatever user you gave it. Now, this can be important because in some enterprise systems, you might have one tool that's supposed to run as the administrator, but you don't want all of your users having admin access. You can set the set UID file for that one program to always run as administrator no matter what, and that's that. You don't have to give everybody else super administrative access. They can just do enough to do their job. that's it for the tools. We'll come back and I'll refer to them as we go through this. So our goal during the hacking of a server is to get administrator access to the server. On Windows, that can be running as the system account or the administrator account. On Linux, it's pretty much running as root. When you see that you're running as root, it means you're God mode to the system. You can do whatever the hell you want. And that's our goal. So let's come in here, clear these up. Now I have this running locally, so I don't have a website for it, but this is the server. This is the website that we're trying to attack. 192.168.250.4, and this is the web page that opens up immediately. If you've watched the show, there's some kind of lore in here that goes with it, but if you haven't watched the show, it also doesn't matter. Well, we're going to get started. So the Nmap tool, which is that first one we talked about, network mapping, we're going to use this to scan 192.168.250.4. Now if there's no arguments that go with it, and I just run Nmap as a basic, not sponsored. Yeah, true. MrRobot is really good. So this will show us that port 22, port 80, and port 443 are open. So I'm sorry, port 22 is closed. Port 22 being SSH, for those of you that are not Linux familiar, that's basically like remote terminal for Linux. That's how I'm using my server right now. That's how I'm typing in these commands on a different server. But we see HTTP and HTTPS are open. It's really great because it'll tell you the service that's over here. Now, Nmap, being as powerful as it is, has a really cool few features. In this case, I like to use -A for basic stuff. What -A will do is scan all of these ports, find out the service that's running, find out the version of the service that's running, try to figure out what operating system it's running, and it runs a few extra scans on the web server side. That'll take a few seconds to run. Let me try to expand this out here. Great. So a little bit more information. It looks like a lot, but it's not really that bad. Still shows us 22 is closed, port 80 is open, but this time it gives us a version. It says that Apache is the software running the HTTP server. That's important because now we know that Apache might be an attack vector. Same with 443. We see it is SSL, and it is also Apache is running it. So we know 443, 80 open, and we know the service is behind it. Well, when we browse to this here, we're on HTTP, so we know it's port 80. We see that there's a website open. So what I talked about before is running the dirb attack. So dirb takes a few commands here. And then the word list file we're going to use. We'll use common here. So this is just a list of a bunch of the most common words or common directories rather on a server. And if you see it going through all of these really quick, it's just constantly calling out and coming back, calling out, coming back, calling out, coming back. And if it successfully finds the directory, it's telling us about it. Now, while that's running, we already got a few responses, /0 and /admin. So /admin sounds fun to me. So while that's running, I'm going to go check it out. Well, /admin just kind of brought me back to the beginning, so nothing too thrilling there. But the one above that was /0. We'll check that out while it's still scanning. /0 brought us to a WordPress site. So spoiler alert, I know it was WordPress, which is why I explained it to you earlier. But now we know from dirb, go into this directory, we know that WordPress is an attack vector here. Now, the thing about WordPress is, being it's as popular as it is, there's a specific tool out there that exists to scan it. It's called WP Scan, short for WordPress Scanner. I'll show you that in this window. So WP Scan will check for some common vulnerabilities in WordPress. It'll check for outdated themes, any plugins that are known to have vulnerabilities, but also has a few cool features about enumeration. So enumeration, what I like to use here is users. Right? Eventually I'm going to want to log in. So I'm going to need to find out how I can log in here. There's a bunch of word list password brute forcing, which we'll touch on. These are basic examples. The plugins, the themes. Now, even without doing the enumerate P, enumerate T, it'll still do these. But the one that I'm concerned about is the users. So we're going to use this here. And we're going to just change the URL. To that. And we'll go to /0 to tell it to go to WordPress. So, is anybody not clear how we got to this point so far? I'll stop for a second. All right, cool. So, we're going to let this run for a second. I don't need to update it, it's fine. And I didn't need to give it a /0. So let this run. It's going to enumerate through a whole bunch of things, check WordPress for any sort of vulnerability or plugin that it might find useful. And it did. And I got no users. That's interesting, because definitely should have. But that's okay, it found something different. It found a robots.txt file. So let's check out what the robots.txt file is. If there's something in there, then they don't want us to find it. Robots.txt. Okay, so can you see the robots.txt? Yeah, you can. So we've got two files in here. Key 1 of 3. This is something that is common on CTF challenges, or capture the flag, is these keys are flags. So the fact that we found key 1 of 3 indicates that was one of the 3 flags we were supposed to find. So I'm going to go to key 1 of 3. So it prompts to update. It is updating its list of vulnerabilities, kind of like AV. Yeah, exactly. Exactly like that. So key 1 of 3.txt, and this is just a long string. This is common output for flags or for keys, and that's because in like a capture the flag challenge, you want to make sure people aren't just going to guess what the flag was. I don't think you're going to guess that. If you do, kudos, but that's what those are there for. So we got one key down. Let's do key 1. You're not copying? There we go. Let's go back, and we found fsaucity.dic. Well, that looks like a dictionary file. So dictionary file, word list, the UCM.txt, .doc, .dic, it's all the same thing. So we're going to download that. Where did you go? We're going to use wget, which is basically just downloader for Linux command line, and just download it directly from the command line. So fsaucity.dic, it's probably supposed to be fsociety because that's the play on MrRobot. And if we look at it, There's 858,160 lines in this file. One thing I like to do with it is if we take the file, we're going to run a few commands here, sort and unique. So just, yeah, okay. We're going to pipe it into fsaucity.unique.dict. What this does is it's going to read all the contents of the file, sort them in alphabetical order, and remove any duplicates. That's just an easy way. Being I have to iterate through the entire dictionary, I want to make sure that I'm not getting through, I'm not pummeling through 7, 8 variations of the same word. It's just a waste of time and a likelier chance of setting off alerts. So I'm going to save all of that inside of this fsaucity.unique.dict. So comparing that, well, it went from 858,000 to 11,000. That is a significant difference and will save us a lot of time. Now, for whatever reason, I think that I broke this last time. Give me 1 second. I just have to revert this virtual machine because it definitely should have found users. So while we're going through that, if anybody has other questions, please feel free to let me know. Yeah, it is a gigantic difference, and that's not uncommon because a lot of password lists are aggregations of other password lists. So if you have 3 with the same, you just put 3 in the same collection, you're likely to have more than one of the same password. Let me try updating it, but that definitely should have worked. Yeah, Rocky was gigantic, but we found fsaucity.dict on here. We know fsaucity, or fsociety rather, is important to MrRobot, so this is probably going to be the dictionary file that we use. But it's going to take a second because I need to revert my virtual machine to a snapshot that I took of it to get it all back to normal. And it should be back to normal. Let's make sure. Actually, I'm just gonna make sure everything loads properly before I start rerunning the scan on it. Technical difficulties, apologies. I might edit this out for the video. Come on, you can do it. Come on, you can do it. Problem loading page. So I tested this out like 3 times today because I was panicking and making sure everything worked right. So obviously it isn't going to work right. I'm just rebooting it. I'm gonna wait for it to start back up. You're a beautiful human being, Killer Tofu. Ooh-wee ooh. Killer Tofu. Well, so we have a minute. How's everybody else doing? I'm having some fun. Definitely a little nervous, but yeah, I'll leave them up. I gotta figure out how to get my recordings and shit up here. Thankfully, we've got somebody cool, the doctor here, with a lot of important information. bestbuy.com/services/remote support. No comment. No comment. All right, let's back up. Give it a second to start services. There we go. All right, let's try this again. It'd be really funny if it doesn't work this time too. Yeah, no users. Really, really weird. Like I said, tested this out a whole bunch. Where did I find an HTTPS? No, I didn't think so. Sorry, just bear with me. We're going to run this really quick. If this doesn't work, I'll just show you the... there we go. Okay. So I had to give it the actual path to the blog homepage. I have never done that in the past, but hey, if computers worked properly all the time, I wouldn't have had a job for like 10 years. So cool. Anyway, to recap, this command was our WP scan to scan WordPress. I gave it the URL, and we were enumerating the users of it. So now that we know the users, we have their login information. We don't have their password, but we were able to get at least the users. Normally, people might try them in order. I'm just going to take and run with Elliot because I've watched the show, and Elliot is the name of the main character, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say that his account's probably the important one. If you're doing, your own CTFs, use your best judgment, or try them all. Really up to you. So to recap what we've got so far, we've got a word list called fsockety.dick. We've got users, which are Elliot and Mitch05654. We know it's running WordPress, so we can use WP scan. And Derb found a whole bunch of stuff, but I'm not even going to worry about it right now. Okay. How's that? You guys see it all? All right, cool. So keeping some handy little notes here. Happy little tree. So if you recall back in the beginning of the stream, we talked about word lists and how they can be used to brute force things like directories, which we were doing with Derb over here. But more commonly, they're used to brute force passwords. In this case, we're going to brute force the password. Now, we've got our 11,451 lines of potential password. And we've got the user of Elliot. So if we click WP scan again, we know that this is the command in order to brute force the word admin, or the user admin. We don't really care about admin. We want Elliot. And our word list is in a different location. And our URL is a bit different as well. Okay. So we're going to run that, see if that works. If not, I'll add the 0 on the end of it as well. We'll see it start brute forcing in a second. There you go. So you can see all the attempts at the bottom and how quick that's going. Let's take about a minute. So you've got a minute here if somebody has any question thus far. Or comment. How am I doing? Is there anything you want me to start doing better? Go slower? Go faster? Talk in a higher pitched voice? This is the boring part. Just watching things go. Although honestly, I think it's pretty cool. I'll roll in my sleeve for you, Christian. Except it's cold, so I won't do that. I think it's pretty cool because I think it's, looking at the back end of it, it's essentially trying the login name Elliot with a bunch of password attempts on the back end, 11,452. So we're getting there. Hopefully it's not at the bottom. That would suck. It's not. It should take another 20 seconds or so. Now, hopefully everyone's been able to keep up so far, because we're about to get significantly more technical. I'm going to do my best to explain it as best I can, but if you have questions, please let me know. This is supposed to be a 101 type level, so I will be more than happy to stop for a minute to explain something if we jump too far ahead. And corrupted can get banned. Cool. So, success. They found a password. Their password was in the word list. All right. So Elliot's password is here. We're just going to copy that. I'm going to save that over here. That way we know. Okay. So we're going to go to login here. By using the fancy login button. Well, we know Elliot is the username. We just got the password of ER28-0652. And success. We are logged in to WordPress. Howdy, Elliot Alderson. Up here, we are this person. Now, the one advantage of you guys watching me here is you're not going to go stumbling through everything, right? I don't want to show you every possible thing you can check while you're on here. We're just going to do the things that work, and that's just for sake of time. A CTF can take several hours, sometimes days, if it's hard enough. But this is just to show the basics of how it's done, right? Getting there is a totally different lesson you'll probably have to end up learning yourself. But I'm more than happy to help you out. So, a really common issue with WordPress is the themes and the plugins, which I mentioned in the beginning. Some plugins aren't coded properly, some themes aren't coded properly, they have vulnerabilities in them, what have you. In this particular instance, the themes is where we're gonna go. So these are some older themes, 2013, 2014, 2015. I'm guessing they update with each year. But it's really cool the way that the servers work. When you go to upload a theme, you'll see here, it's looking for it in zip format. The way that this application works is it uploads the file first and then checks to see if it's in the right format, which means if I want to give it a malicious file, it doesn't have to be in zip format. I can give it whatever format it wants. It's going to try to install it and store it on there anyway. That's really, really important for what we're about to do. So I talked earlier about a reverse shell. That's when I can have netcat running on one and run a command on another to connect to it and get the two shells to talk to each other. In my instance, I was just echoing commands back and forth to each other, one to the other. But what's going to happen on here is we have a maliciously crafted PHP file. It's just a PHP is used in HTML for web pages, make them look pretty. And it's also a really powerful scripting tool, especially for the web, but also extremely exploitable if it's not done properly. So I have a reverse shell.php ready to go. There's a bunch of comments on here. I'll link the website that I got this. It's from a website called Pentest Monkey. I did not write this myself. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. A really good one existed, so I used it. But what we're going to do here is where it says change this, we're going to make sure that these two numbers match ours. Sure. I don't know if you want to find me on the vulnerable part, because I'll think I'll win that one. But if it's not coded properly, it's very bad. So what I'm going to copy here, the IP import, is I'm going to make sure that these match my local system, the one that I'm going to connect back to. So ultimately, I'm going to upload this file to the server, execute it, and it's going to run this command, which is the shell, and it's going to connect back to me so I have a shell on that server. So we'll come back over to my machine, do an ifconfig, see 192.168.250.35, that's right. And the port I want to listen on, use that netcat tool that I showed you earlier. We're going to listen on port 4433 because it's already listed right here and I don't feel like changing it. So we've got that. We're going to browse and we're going to upload the file here. So install now. And we get an error. It is in a bad format. So it can't find the end of the central directory record signature. It's not a zip file. It's not going to find that. But it's important because WordPress stores it on here. If you look in the media library, you'll see all the pictures from the website and our reverse shell. So the file exists. I'm going to click and find out where the file exists. This is the path to the file. So in order to execute PHP code, it has to be browsed to or called from another website. But for the sake of this, we need to actually tell the server, run this file. And because of the issues in this version of WordPress, I'm going to be listening down here. I'm going to copy this. And we're going to run the file. So in running the file, I'm going to come back. In running the file, it's essentially going to give me a shell back to this IP address on this port. This server, or this Kali machine that I'm running, is that IP address listening on this port, so it should get this shell. And we'll hit enter. If you look on the left side here, suddenly it changed. We're getting a connection from 192 to 168.250.4, just like this up here. And if I do an ifconfig, I am suddenly on that server. So I now have user access to this server that doesn't have SSH open, it doesn't have any remote desktop open. I am just on the server now, and I can run arbitrary commands. Now, the goal, as I said in the beginning, is to get administrator or root access. It's unlikely that somebody left WordPress running as root, so we'll see. Who am I? I am Damon. So Damon's a different service account that's running on the server that's running WordPress. We will assume it does not have any sort of admin access, because if it did, I would see it in here. I'd see my group ID be wheel or root. If I do this right, and it's not. So if you notice, in my terminal, I have my username and my host name right next to each other in the beginning. That's an interactive shell. Okay, that's what I can use. That's how I know how I'm running. What we have here is a limited shell. Limited shell can't do certain things. So I can't switch user. Oh, okay. Sorry, down here. No. I'm new to the streaming thing, guys. Bear with me. Cool. So see my username / hostname. You don't see it here because this is a limited shell. What we want is a full shell. We want to be able to do completely interactive things with it. Luckily, there's several ways of doing this. My favorite one is using Python. Python is installed on, I think, pretty much every Linux package. Mine is probably like Arch Linux. Josh can correct me if I'm wrong there, but it's a pretty big staple on operating systems. It's on Macs, it's on Linux. It's pretty universal. And to be sure, we can do which Python, and if it returns something, which it does, Python exists on this machine. Oh, probably even worked. Okay. So the cool thing with Python, we've got a command we can run here. Python -c runs a command. You don't have to be a programmer to do this. Seriously, just copy paste. But what we're doing is we're getting the PTY library from Python, which again, Python's installed on pretty much everything. And we're running /bin bash, which is the shell for this version of Linux. So when we run it, we are upgraded to an actual shell. You see daemon at Linux. And now we have access to the machine, so we can poke around. Normally the first thing I'll do is check out like the temp directory. There's nothing really in there. The VMware -root is just because it's a capture the flag run on VMware. That's not actually relevant here. The other thing we'll do is go into the home folder and find out what users are on here. Well, inside the home folder we see a robot user. So we're going to go into robot. Key 2. That's our second flag. And we see a password file. So the cat command on Linux will read files. I'm going to cat key 2 of 3.txt to see what the second flag is, but I don't have permission. So we'll do an ls-l, find out. It looks like only robot, the user robot, has permission to read this file. So I know my next goal here is to figure out how to become robot. Well, the password file can be read by everybody. I won't go too much into the Linux permissions, but basically these 3 here are what the owner of the file can do, this is what the group can do, and then this is what the rest of the world can do. I'm the rest of the world, and I can read. So we're going to cat the password.raw-md5, and we're met with this. So I know robot's the username, so it's safe to assume the second part's the password, given the name of the file. Also given the name of the file, we can assume it's an MD5 hash. As we discussed about hashing in the beginning, we need to have a really big word list to try to crack this. Luckily, there's so many free tools online to crack hashes, you shouldn't really ever have to worry about doing it locally. I might do a video at some point locally to show you how to do it, but it's largely irrelevant because your tools are probably not more powerful than the servers running on the online. So I'm going to come over to our MD5 decrypt, paste that in, and decrypt it. We found the hash. It just happens to be every letter of the alphabet. So everybody good so far? Everybody understood the hash, how we got here? If there's anybody that doesn't, I guess, speak up. So one thing tough about streaming is the delay. I don't want to go and have people not say, Steven gets it, cool. All right, so we knew the hash is every letter of the alphabet. So we know the user is robot, the password is probably every letter of the alphabet. So SU to switch users. I'm going to switch user to the robot user. Asks for a password. I'll paste in every letter of the alphabet. Z. And you'll notice I changed from daemon to robot. So I'm now running as the robot user. I'd like to tell you that in my experience, password files being in plain text like that is uncommon. However, it's not. I can tell you from personal and professional experience that at multiple places of employment, users have stored their stuff in plain text. Text files sitting on their desktop, HTML files, which are just plain text files. I'd like to tell you that it's not common, but I'd be lying. So, again, pretty good attack vector, as simple as it may seem, is just looking around to see what exists. So we will finally, being robot, look at key 2 of 3.txt, and that's our second flag. 2 down, 1 to go. I'm going to copy this out. And now we've got to find key 3. Now that we have access to the server, running as a local user, our next goal is to get administrator root access. Yeah, do you store your password in PHP? Yes, password managers. Let me just advocate for password managers really quick. Please use them. Don't be dumb. Yeah, that. Cool. So we've got the second key here, and now we want to get to root access. There's so many different ways to get root, and that's not in any system. That's just there's different methods you can use. Sometimes the password might be the same. You can just try to switch users to the root user, type in the same password, and it's fine. That's called the lazy sysadmin approach, because they can't be, bothered to use the same password, or they can't be bothered to use different passwords, and they use the same passwords across all their accounts. Again, not uncommon. Very common, in fact. So you can try that. I know it won't work here, so I'm not going to try it. But because of how many different ways there are to get admin access, there's some tools for enumeration. Enumeration is key, and that's something you learn across your journey if you decide to go down this route. Enumeration is key. Instead of throwing a million things at this to try to break it, just look first. Just read first, and eventually you'll see something that makes sense. So what we're going to do is run a enumeration script. This basically saves hours of time because it automates the looking around portion. And there's a really cool tool called linuxprivchecker.py. This is a Python file, which is great because, as we've discussed, Python exists everywhere, more or less. But I need to get it from my local machine to this server. So I'm going to go to the temp folder on this server where nothing exists. Python has another cool feature. I'm a huge Python fanboy. Called simple HTTP server. And all this does is spawns a simple HTTP server. It does nothing more than now every file in this directory, which is the Linux priv checker, the no shell, and the reverse shell.php, is being hosted on port 8000 on this machine. Which means if I use wget again, which is that downloading tool, I can connect to my Kali machine on port 8000 and download linuxprivchecker.py. Going to my IP address, port 8000, linuxprivchecker.py. When I hit enter, we'll see in the log this IP address, which we know is the MrRobot machine, did a GET request to this file, and 200 is the success code, meaning it's successfully transferred. So we'll look at it here. Linux priv checker, sure enough, it worked. I'm not going to run it, and normally I would store this in a file so you wouldn't see the output, but that's boring, so I'm going to run it. And you'll see a whole bunch of things that it's doing right now. We can scroll back up through and I'll show you kind of what it actually is searching for. But it's basically looking for all the users that exist in the system. It's looking to see if any passwords are stored in common files. It's going to check what kind of groups exist in the system. It'll check what applications are running, if there's any uncommon applications running. It'll check for known vulnerabilities in the system. So if, say this were, for simplicity, we'll say like the Linux version of Windows XP, right? There's thousands of holes in that. It'll look at the server type, the server version, the OS version, and search the database to say, is there anything available? There is? Cool. And spit it back out to us at the bottom and say, you can use these exploits in order to get root access to this machine. Really, really useful. I use this a lot in my OSCP course. I'm going to try to scroll up here. So it found one super user or admin. That's root, which is fine. That's what we're looking for. Cron jobs are like scheduled tasks, just things that happen every hour, every day, every week, whatever it may be. It's a really common place to check for exploits. Give you an example. One of the first capture the flag machines I ever did, there was a cron job that would use tar, which is the compression, like zipping on Linux. There was a tar command that would tar up the temp directory into its own file and then erase it. Why it was important was the code that it was using allowed me to name a file as a command. So I just named the file like bin bash, or I put my reverse shell as the name of the file. And when it read it as a standard input, and it executed that as root. So that was really cool because I didn't have to do anything super technical. I just said, run this file. You're already running the command to tar to do it, so go for it. Anyway, so all finished. So at the bottom here, these are exploits that might work on the server. This one is the most common that it'll run. We're not going to delve into compiling exploits because that's a little bit more advanced, but what we are interested in is this part here. So these are the installed tools. Now a lot of this is common. Awk, Perl, Python, GCC, VI, Find, Netcat, those are all very common on Linux systems. The one that's not is Nmap. So Nmap is going to be something that we're going to look at. But looking up a little bit, we're going to find where it finds the set UID files, so the SUID files that I talked about in the beginning of the stream. So SUID files, we are interested in the ones that are running as root, all across the board. Now, a lot of these are okay. They exist on Linux systems just by default, like sudo. Sudo runs as root, that's what it does. crontab, passwd, su, these are all okay. So looking for anything that stands out. Anything that might be useful to us. Like this one. As we just discussed, Nmap is not common, and Nmap is running as root all the time. We used Nmap in the beginning to scan ports, but there are certain versions of Nmap that have specific exploits and specific vulnerabilities. Coming back down to the bottom, we know that Nmap is installed, we know it runs as root, and it has an escape sequence. So an escape sequence is, it allows you to go from a tool to run arbitrary commands. In VI, which is like a notepad editor, you can run that, and you can get a bash shell. With Nmap, you can run -- interactive on this version of Nmap, which we know here, and that'll give you an interactive way to interact with the tool. So we're going to go that route. And if we look at the help command, we see all of the options that it can use, and we see this Nmap 3.81, which is a vulnerable version. And at the very bottom, we have the -- interactive. So let's do Nmap -- interactive. Well, it doesn't look like I'm running as root. It looks like I'm running Nmap now. I'm running as Nmap. So we're going to run help and take a look at what interactive commands we can do. So we can run n and do an argument. That'll execute an Nmap scan, which we don't want. We already know the host we want. We're on the host we want. We're not trying to scan anything else. But this one is cool. Exclamation point next to a command runs the shell command. So, knowing what we know, looks like Nmap is running as root, as we suspected. And you got that from run this command, who am I, hitting enter, comes up as root. The waiting to reap child, no child processes is something that's just going to come up whenever we run these commands. So I'm not really bothered by that. All I'm curious about is the fact that it says root. So if I can run commands as root, that means that I can run any command as root. So I could easily just read the flag.3, right? Could probably do ls/root, and yep, I see key 3 of 3 in the root folder. So I could cat that, but I want a full shell, right? I want to be able to do what I want to do. That is my goal. I don't want to just run one command at a time. I want a full control. So sh, or bash, that's the shell for the Linux systems. So if I run ! Run sh, I get a little pound sign. Well, if you have Linux knowledge, # means you are running as root. So I now have root access. But this is not an interactive shell. So if I want to get the interactive shell, I'm going to come back to my, I'm going to close that. I'm going to come back to my no shell cheat sheet here. Copy. Paste. Oh, sorry, bin bash won't work. I need to do that. Okay, well, apparently it doesn't want to give me a shell. So never mind. There's other ways of getting to it, but it's a little bit more advanced. I was hoping the one-liner would work here. You can still run arbitrary commands as root with this shell. And to be completely honest with you, I don't want to get into the super advanced ways of getting a second reverse shell into getting a full shell here. So the fact that I can still run the commands is really what we want. So if I go into root, we see key 3 of 3, which can only be read as the root user because root owns the files. Look at key 3 of 3 dot text. And that's it. I now have all 3 keys. I have root access. With root access, I can do whatever I want. I can install things. I can add users. It's actually one of the first things I'd probably do is just add my own users, so that way people don't see a bunch of root traffic. They'll just see user 1 being added. Open up ports. I can look through all of their log files. I'm sure that there's going to be something interesting in here, potentially some passwords, potentially some ways to jump to other servers, right? There's a lot you can find just from listening and just from looking. But this is it. We have root access. We've completely owned the machine. We started from nothing and now have God mode. As a quick recap, we used nmap to check and see what ports were open. Once we found port 80, we ran dirb to see what directories existed on the machine. Once we had dirb, we were able to find /0, visiting it. We saw it was WordPress, which allowed us to use WP scan to scan it for users. When we scanned it for users, we got Elliot. We found it also had robots.txt from the WP scan, which brought us the word list. We brute forced the Elliot username with the passwords that we found from the SSID and got access to the WordPress admin page. WordPress admin page, we executed a well-known vulnerability, allowing us to have a special crafted PHP tool, and it allowed us to get a shell. Once we had that shell, we're able to run a quick privilege escalation check. That took about a minute or two, and we're able to use nmap. Thankfully, we've read that from the privilege checker. We're able to run nmap interactively to get to a root shell. Altogether, not too bad for an hour. Now, of course, there are a lot of more advanced ways and more advanced machines. I'd probably rate this one like a 2 or a 3 out of 10. It's very basic and uses all automated stuff. Some of the more advanced ones I might get into a little bit later if there's some good feedback from here. But if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. But other than that, we're basically all finished. We have the root access, and that's our goal. How's that?